Good morning. Happy day. It's day 3 for Pippi Longstocking. Yesterday we left Pippi and Annika and Tommy as thing finders, and Pippi had found a spool of thread. So let's see what happens. However, just at that moment, the gate of one of the cottages nearby opened and a boy came rushing out. He looked scared, and that was no wonder, because head over heels after him came 5 other boys. They soon caught him and pushed him against the fence, and all 5 began to punch and hit him. He cried and held his arms in front of his face to protect himself. Give it to him, cried the oldest and strongest of the boys, so that he'll never dare show his face on this street again. Oh, said Annika, it's Willie they're hurting. How can they be so mean? It's that awful Bent, Tommy said. He's always in a fight. And 5 against 1, what cowards. Pippi went up to the boys and tapped Bent on the back with her forefinger. Hello there, she said. What's the idea? Are you trying to make hash out of little Willie with all 5 of you jumping on him at once? Bent turned around and saw a little girl he'd never seen before, a wild-looking little stranger who dared to touch him. For a while he just stood and gaped at her in astonishment. Then a broad grin spread over his face. Boys, he said, boys, let Willie alone and take a look at this girl. What a babe. He slapped his knee and laughed, and in an instant they all flocked around Pippi, all except Willie, who wiped away his tears and walked cautiously over to stand beside Tommy. Have you ever seen hair like hers, red as fire? And such shoes, Ben continued. Can I borrow one? I'd like to go out rowing and I haven't any boat. He took hold of one of Pippi's braids, but dropped it instantly and cried, ouch, I burned myself. Then all 5 boys joined hands around Pippi, jumping up and down and screaming, redhead, redhead, redhead. Pippi stood in the middle of the ring and smiled in the friendliest way. Bent had hoped she'd get mad and cry. At least she ought to have looked scared. When nothing happened, he gave her a push. I don't think you have a very nice way with the ladies, said Pippi. And she lifted him in her strong arms high in the air and carried him to a birch tree and hung him over a branch. Then she took the next boy and hung him over another branch. The next one she set on a gatepost outside a cottage. And the next one she threw right over a fence so that he landed in a flower bed. The last one of the fighters she put in a tiny toy cart that stood by the road. Then Pippi, Tommy, Annika, and Willie stood and looked at the boys for a while. The boys were absolutely speechless with fright. And Pippi said, you are cowards. 5 of you attacking one boy, that's cowardly. Then you began to push a helpless little girl around. Oh, how mean. I don't think she's helpless. Come on now, we'll go home, she said to Tommy and Annika, and to Willie. If they try to hurt you again, you come and tell me. And to Bent, who sat up in the tree and didn't dare to stir, she said, is there anything else you have to say about my hair or my shoes? If so, you better say it now before I go home. But Bent had nothing to say about Pippi's hair or about her shoes. So Pippi took her can in one hand and her spool in the other and went away, followed by Tommy and Annika. When they were back home in Pippi's garden, Pippi said, dear me, how awful. Here I have found 2 beautiful things, and you didn't get anything. You must hunt a little more. Tommy, why don't you look in that old hollow tree? Old trees are usually about the best places to find for all thing finders. Tommy said that he didn't believe he and Annika would ever find anything, but to please Pippi, he put his hand slowly down the hollow tree trunk. Goodness, he cried, utterly amazed, and pulled out his hand. In it he held a little notebook with a leather cover. In a special loop there was a little silver pencil. Well, that's odd, said Tommy. Now see that, said Pippi. There's nothing so nice as being a thing finder. It's a wonder there aren't more people that take it up. There'll be tailors or shoemakers and chimney sweeps and such like. But thing finders, no indeed, that isn't good enough for them. And then she said to Annika, why don't you feel in that old tree stump? One practically always finds things in tree stumps. Annika stuck her hand down in the stump and almost immediately got hold of a red coral necklace. She and Tommy stood open-mouthed for the longest time. They were so astonished. They thought that hereafter they would be thing finders every day. Pippi had been up half the night before playing ball, and now she suddenly felt sleepy. I think I'll go and take a nap, she said. Can't you come in with me and tuck me in? When Pippi was sitting on the edge of the bed taking off her shoes, she looked at them thoughtfully. He was going out rowing, he said, that old bent. She snorted disdainfully. I'll teach him to row, indeed I will, another time. Say, Pippi, said Tommy respectfully, why do you wear such big shoes? So I can wiggle my toes, she answered. Then she crept into bed. She always slept with her feet on the pillow and her head way down under the quilt. That's the way they sleep in Guatemala, she announced. And it's the only real way to sleep. See, like this, I can wiggle my toes when I'm sleeping too. Can you go to sleep without a lullaby? She went on. I always have to sing myself to sleep for a little while. Otherwise, I can't sleep a wink. Tommy and Annika heard a humming sound under the quilt. It was Pippi singing herself to sleep. Quietly and cautiously, they tiptoed out so that they would not disturb her. In the doorway, they turned to take a last look toward the bed. They could see nothing of Pippi except her feet resting on the pillow. There she lay, wiggling her toes emphatically. Tommy and Annika ran home. Annika held her coral necklace tightly in her hand. That certainly was strange, she said. Tommy, do you suppose that Pippi put those things in place beforehand? You never can tell, said Tommy. You just never can tell about anything when it comes to Pippi. It soon became known throughout the little town that a 9-year-old girl was living all by herself in Villa Villacula, and all the ladies and gentlemen in town thought this would never do. All children must have someone to advise them, and all children must go to school to learn their multiplication tables. So, the ladies and gentlemen decided that the little girl in Villa Villacula must immediately be placed in a children's home. One lovely afternoon, Pippi had invited Tommy and Annika over for afternoon coffee and peppercorn. She had spread the party out on the front steps. It was so sunny and beautiful there, and the air was filled with the fragrance of the flowers in Pippi's garden. Mr. Nielsen climbed around on the porch railing, and every now and then the horse stuck his head out so that he'd be invited to have cookies. Oh, isn't it glorious to be alive, said Pippi, stretching out one of her legs as far as she could reach. Just at that moment, 2 police officers in full dress uniform came in through the gate. Hooray, said Pippi. This must be my lucky day, too. Policemen are the very best things I know, next to rhubarb pudding. And with her face beaming, she went to meet them. Is this the girl who has moved into Villa Villacula? Asked one of the policemen. Of Quite the contrary, said Pippi. This is a tiny little auntie who lives on the 3rd floor at the other end of town. Oh, she said that only because she wanted to have a little fun with the policeman, but they didn't think it was funny at all. They said she shouldn't be such a smarty. And then they went on to tell her that some nice people in the town were arranging for her to get into a children's home. I already have a place in a children's home, said Pippi. What? Said one of the policemen. Has it already been arranged then? What children's home? This one, said Pippi haughtily. I am a child, and this is my home. Therefore, it is a children's home, and I have room enough here, plenty of room. Dear child, said the policeman, smiling, you don't understand. You must get into a real children's home and have someone look after you. Is it allowed to bring horses to this children's home? Asked Pippi. Well, no, of course not, said the policeman. That's what I thought, said Pippi sadly. Well, what about monkeys? Of course not. You ought to realize that. Well then, said Pippi, you'll have to get kids for your children's home somewhere else. I certainly don't intend to move there. But don't you understand that you must go to school? Why? Well, to learn things, of course. What sort of things? Asked Pippi. Well, all sorts, said the policeman. Lots of useful things. The multiplication tables, for instance. I've got along fine without any multiplication tables for 9 years, said Pippi, and I guess I'll get along without it from now on, too. Yes, but just think how embarrassing it will be for you to be so ignorant. Imagine when you grow up and somebody asks you what the capital of Portugal is and you can't answer. Oh, I can answer, all right, said Pippi. I'll answer like this. If you are so bound and determined to find out what the capital of Portugal is, then for goodness sake, write directly to Portugal and ask. Yes, but don't you think you would be sorry not to know yourself? Oh, probably, said Pippi. No doubt I should lie awake at night and wonder and wonder and wonder. What is the capital of Portugal? But one can't be having fun all the time, she continued, bending over and standing on her hands for a change. For that matter, I've been in Lisbon with my papa, she said, standing upside down, for she could talk that way too. But then one of the policemen said that Pippi certainly didn't need to think she could do just what she pleased. She must come to the children's home, and immediately. He went up to her and took hold of her arm, but Pippi freed herself quickly and touched him lightly and said, "Tag!" Before he could wink an eye, she climbed up on the porch railing and from there onto the balcony above the porch. The policemen couldn't quite see themselves getting up the same way, so they rushed into the house and up the stairs. But by the time they reached the balcony, Pippi was halfway up on the roof. She climbed up the shingles almost as if she were a little monkey herself. In a moment she was up on the ridgepole, and from there she jumped easily to the chimney. Down on the balcony stood the two policemen, scratching their heads, and on the lawn stood Tommy and Annika, just staring up at Pippi. "Isn't it fun to play tag?" said Pippi. "And weren't you nice to come over? It certainly is my lucky day." After the policeman had stood there a while wondering what to do, they went and got a ladder, leaned it against one of the gables of the house, and then climbed up. First one policeman and then the other, to get Pippi down. They looked a little scared when they climbed out on the ridgepole, and carefully balancing themselves, went step by step toward Pippi. "Don't be scared," cried Pippi. "There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just fun." When the policemen were a few steps away from Pippi, down she jumped from the chimney and, screeching and laughing, ran along the ridgepole to the opposite gable. A few feet from the house stood a tree. "Now I'm going to dive," she cried, and jumped right down into the green crown of the tree, caught hold of a branch, swung back and forth a while, and then let herself fall to the ground. Quick as a wink, she dashed around to the other side of the house and took away the ladder. Oh. The policeman had looked a little foolish when Pippi jumped, but they looked even more foolish when they balanced themselves backwards along the ridgepole and were about to climb down the ladder. At first they were angry at Pippi, who stood on the ground just looking up at them. They told her in no uncertain terms to get that ladder and be quick about it, or she would soon be getting something she wasn't looking for. "Why are you so cross at me?" said Pippi reproachfully. "We're just playing tag, aren't we?" The policeman thought for a while, and the last one said, "Oh, come on, be a good girl. Put the ladder back so we can get down." "Well, of course I will," said Pippi, and she put the ladder back instantly. "And when you get down, we can all drink coffee and have a happy time." But the policemen were certainly tricky, because the minute they were down on the ground, they pounced on Pippi and cried, "Now you'll get it, you little brat." "Oh, no, I'm sorry. I haven't time to play any longer," said Pippi, but it was fun. Then she took hold of the policemen by their belts and carried them down the garden path, out through the gate and onto the street. There she sat them down, and it was quite some time before they were ready to get up again. Can't you see it? "Wait a minute," she cried, and ran to the kitchen and came back with 2 cookie hearts. "Would you like a taste?" she asked. "It doesn't matter that they're a little bird, does it?" Then she went back to Tommy and Annika, who just stood there wide-eyed and couldn't get over what they had seen. And the policeman hurried back to town and told all the ladies and gentlemen that Pippi wasn't quite fit for a children's home. They did tell him that they had been up on the roof. And the ladies and gentlemen decided that it would be best, after all, to let Pippi remain in Villa Villacula. And if she wanted to go to school, she could just make the arrangements herself. But Pippi and Tommy and Annika had a very pleasant afternoon. They went back to their interrupted coffee party. Pippi stuffed herself with 14 cookies, and then she said, "They weren't what I mean by real policemen. No, sirree. Altogether too much talk about children's home and plutification and Lisbon." Afterwards, she lifted the horse down on the ground and rode him. All 3 of them rode on him. At first, Annika was afraid and didn't want to, but when she saw what fun Tommy and Pippi were having, she let Pippi lift her up onto the horse's back. The horse trotted round and round in the garden, and Tommy sang, "Here come the Swedes with a clang and a bang." When Tommy and Annika had gone to bed that night, Tommy said, "Annika, don't you think it's good that Pippi moved here?" "Oh, yes," said Annika. "I don't even remember what we used to play before she came. Do you?" "Oh, sure. We played croquet and things like that," said Annika. "But it's lots more fun with Pippi around, I think, and with horses and things." We'll be ready for Chapter 4 tomorrow. Come see us in the library.